All right, today we're tackling a huge and honestly a really tough question. We've all been raised on the idea that foreign aid is one of the best ways to fight global poverty. But what if it's not? What if the trillions of dollars we've spent have, in some ways, made things worse? It's a wild dot, so let's dig in. First, just to get our heads around the numbers, get a load of this. $4.6 trillion. That's how much money has been spent on foreign aid over the last 60 years. I mean, that's just a staggering amount of cash. You'd think that kind of investment would have pretty much solved the problem, right? Well, and this is where it gets really weird. This is the heart of the whole paradox. On the left, you see some of the countries that have received the most aid. On the right, the two countries that have lifted more people out of poverty than any others in history, China and Indonesia. And here's the kicker. They got almost no aid. So what on earth is going on? That's the puzzle we're going to try to solve. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with this paradox. Then we'll do what any good investigator does. We'll follow the money trail. After that, we'll look at how good intentions can have really bad results, get into something called the dependency trap, and finally, we'll tie it all together with this idea of an aid industrial complex. So yeah, this is the central mystery. The fact that the biggest wins against poverty happened without a ton of aid. It forces us to stop and really question this whole 60-year-old strategy from the ground up. All right, first things first, let's follow the money. When you hear that a country is donating $1 billion in aid, how much of that cash actually, lands in the country it's supposed to help? The answer is not what you think. Which leads us to this really provocative question. Is it possible that foreign aid is basically just a way for wealthy governments to pay their own people and companies? To get into that, we have to understand a key concept: phantom aid. So what is phantom aid? Now, this isn't about corruption on the receiving end. This is aid money that never actually leaves the donor country in the first place. It gets spent on things like administrative costs, sky-high consultant fees, or on contracts that say, hey, you have to buy all your stuff from our companies. And this chart just lays it out perfectly. For every dollar of aid, a huge chunk is phantom. Look at that. In many cases, only about 50 cents actually makes it to the country. The other half, it just gets recycled right back into the donor's own economy. It's less of a helping hand and more of a boomerang. Okay, but what about the money that does get through, that 50 cents on the dollar? Surely that's doing good, right? Well, this is where the story gets even more complicated, because sometimes the best intentions can have absolutely devastating results. Just listen to this quote from a textile worker in Africa. It says everything. First, the free t-shirts arrived. A year later, every tailor on my street was gone. Wow. In one sentence, you can feel how a simple act of charity can completely wipe out a local economy. So, how does this happen? It's a pretty simple and tragic chain reaction. First, a flood of free stuff arrives. Naturally, local businesses can't compete with free. I mean, who can? So they go out of business. And before you know it, an entire industry, all the skills, all the jobs, they're just gone. The ironic part, the country is now more dependent on aid, not less. And that leads us right to the next piece of this puzzle, the dependency trap. Most aid projects aren't forever. They have an end date. So what happens when the funding runs out and the foreign NGOs pack up and go home? Who's there to keep the schools running or fix the water pumps? A big part of the answer is this idea from economics called the principal-agent problem. It sounds fancy, but it's simple. The aid organization is the agent. The community they're helping is the principal. The problem is the agent's goals, like writing glowing reports for their donors, aren't always the same as the community's real long-term needs. And you can see how that plays out right here. Year one, there's a big launch, lots of press. But it's all based on a 5-year funding cycle. By year 5, the money stops. And what happens in year 6? The project falls apart. The progress disappears. All that's left is a crumbling building and another broken promise. So when you put it all together, the phantom aid, the market distortion, the projects designed to fail, you realize these aren't just one-off mistakes. They're symptoms of a much bigger system, a system that some people have started calling the aid industrial complex. So what is the aid industrial complex? It's the whole web of governments, NGOs, consultants, and private contractors who all have a reason to keep the aid money flowing, whether it actually works or not. It becomes this massive, self-perpetuating machine where the goal isn't necessarily to end poverty, but to keep the machine itself running. So let's just sum it all up. We found 3 core problems baked into the system. Phantom aid, where the money is more of an illusion.
market distortion, where it help actually hurts by killing local jobs, and unsustainable models, which just create a cycle of dependency. When you see these three things together, that trillion-dollar paradox we started with, well, it suddenly starts to make a lot more sense.
And this brings us to the final and, frankly, the most important question. The goal here isn't to blame people. It's about questioning the system. If after 60 years and $4.6 trillion, the current model just isn't working, then what should? What do we build in its place? Answering that question might just be the most important challenge in global development today.